welcome to the deep dive. So you sent us these fascinating excerpts from Dr. Nimrod Israeli's book, Unlocking Prosperity. And yeah, you were keen for us to dig into this whole idea about why poverty sticks around and maybe how systems design is the key.
That's right.
And that's exactly why we're here. We've looked through the sources, really tried to boil them down, and basically our mission today is to help you grasp the big ideas from his work and hopefully give you a fresh way to look at, well, complex problems generally.
It's a really interesting perspective he brings.
Yeah, absolutely. So today we're looking at this really persistent question. Why is there still so much poverty, despite all the effort, all the money thrown at it? And Dr. Israeli comes in with this pretty provocative idea. Maybe it's not what we're doing, but like the actual design of the systems we live in.
Exactly. It's about the structure itself.
It's a really interesting journey he takes us on. Could change how we think about everything, really, from, local stuff right up to global issues.
It really could. And our deep dive today, it's based on his text, which maps out this quite remarkable path he took. He starts super specific, dealing with an agricultural problem, very hands-on.
Right.
And then, kind of step by step, he uncovers this principle that he argues is universal, applies to all sorts of complex systems, even human societies.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a great example of practical science leading to some really deep thinking.
Okay, so let's unpack that. His journey, it didn't start with these grand theories, did it?
Not at all.
It was on the ground, rural poverty. He mentions being a farmer himself and a scientist. And his first focus wasn't abstract. It was about mangoes, the farmers who grew them, and the insects that destroyed them. Very practical.
That's exactly right. His first big thing was the biofeed project. The problem was serious. These fruit flies were just wiping out crops.
Okay.
So their solution was pretty clever, a scent lure that basically drew the flies to a killing agent. No need for the usual pesticide sprays.
And did it work?
Oh, yeah. The results were pretty dramatic. We're talking over 95% reduction in the infestation. And the farmers involved, their incomes went up, significantly.
Okay, that sounds like a massive win. So here's the million-dollar question then. If this tech was so good, got real results for those farmers, why didn't it just, wipe out poverty in the whole area? That's the bit that gets me.
And that's the crucial point. It really made Dr. Israeli think. His first big realization was that the technology, powerful as it was just too narrow and disconnected from the broader ecosystem's structure. Meaning poverty stuck around, not because the tech failed, it worked great for what it did, but because its scope was just too limited. He couldn't fix everything else going on. Other farmers maybe weren't growing export crops, or they had completely different problems.
I see.
So the core insight was the tools weren't the real bottleneck. It was the system they were being put into.
Right. So if the tech fix wasn't the whole answer, what did he try next? Must have shifted his approach quite a bit.
It did. That led him to set up Dream Valley. This was designed to be, much broader, more comprehensive.
Okay.
So this model, it offered farmers the whole package, basically. Inputs, advice on growing, right through to getting their produce into high-value export markets.
So a more joined-up approach.
Exactly. Much more holistic. And yeah, he says it delivered measurable results, definitely an improvement. But even with that wider scope, he found it still fell short of achieving lasting change across entire communities.
Still not the big breakthrough.
Still not the systemic shift needed for, widespread prosperity.
So it seems like the real change for Dr. Israeli wasn't just what he was doing, but actually how he was thinking about it. He shifted gears into what you're calling structural thinking.
That's the term, yes.
Looking beyond just the pieces to the kind of invisible framework underneath it all.
Precisely. That shift to structural thinking was the absolute game changer. It really highlighted the limits of even really good tools and interventions. Well, it just made it crystal clear that when a system is misaligned, no amount of intervention can produce real progress. It didn't matter how good the tool was if the system itself was, broken or just not set up right.
Okay.
So the challenge wasn't about solving problems within the existing setup anymore. It became about figuring out how to actually redesign the architecture of these communities.
Redesign the architecture. That's a big leap.
It is. Think of it like trying to turn an old shaky shed into a skyscraper. You can't just paint it better or add a new door. You need a whole new foundation, a new structure.
That structural thinking really does change the perspective, but it sounds like a huge conceptual jump, going from, mango pests to universal laws. How did he even start to see those bigger patterns?
Well, once he started thinking about systems, he began asking, much deeper questions, not just about inputs or specific methods, but about the structure itself.
Like what?
Like what holds a system together, what makes it fall apart, and crucially, what allows it to evolve and grow. And no matter what problem he started with, crops, tools, markets, whatever, he kept landing on the same insight. Real lasting change comes down to the design of the system.
Okay.
And that led him to ask this really provocative question. Why do we treat problems in society so differently from problems in, say, physics or engineering? If there are universal laws governing all systems, shouldn't they apply to us, to human societies too?
That's a powerful question. So what was the moment it all clicked, the aha moment?
Well, apparently it came from a slightly unexpected source. He was watching Professor Yuval Noah Harari's lecture, World History Lesson 1.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And Harari was tracing this huge arc, Big Bang, to modern societies. Energy and matter become atoms. Atoms make molecules. Molecules build organisms. Organisms create cultures.
And that sparked something. He saw societies not as separate from nature, but like a continuation of it.
Exactly that. That lecture was a huge moment for him. He realized human societies aren't some special exception. They're part of the same story, shaped by the same deep forces and patterns we see everywhere else in the universe. Wow. Just like stars or cells or ecosystems emerge from specific structures, so do our societies. And this gave him the missing framework, as he put it, for ideas he already had, like his prosperity formula. It let him see societies as things you could actually study scientifically, like biology or physics.
So this massive insight connecting the natural world and human society that directly led to what he calls the universal law of increasing complexity, the ULIC.
That's it, the ULAC.
So how does he actually formulate that? What's the core idea?
Well, it was not just pulled out of thin air. He says it came from a long process of investigation grounded in scientific practice. He'd spent ages trying to figure out why poverty just hangs on, testing all the usual suspects, not enough tech, not enough money, lack of knowledge, motivation, corruption.
And none of them fully explained it?
Nope. He found they just weren't enough to explain these persistent patterns of failure or stagnation. So the law he formulated states, basically, for any system to grow and endure, it must increase its structural complexity over time in a coherent and aligned manner.
Okay, increase structural complexity coherently. And if it doesn't?
When it fails to do so, it becomes vulnerable to stagnation or collapse.
Right, so his conclusion about the farmers wasn't about them lacking willpower or something.
Exactly. He concluded that the poverty of hundreds of millions of farmers is not a failure of will, but the consequence of outdated systems that could not evolve. The system itself was stuck.
That really reframes the whole problem, doesn't it? It's not the individual, it's the container.
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
And he looked back historically, too. Noticed how our basic ways of organizing bands, tribes, villages, cities, even things like LLCs or the kibbutz model, he knew, well, mostly just kind of happened.
Yeah.
Trial and error.
Not deliberate design.
Mostly not. And crucially, he argues, we often haven't really recognized how fundamentally different these structures are and what that means for what they can actually achieve.
And that has huge implications for trying to help, for development work.
Yeah.
Because they often focus on the visible stuff, right? The tech, the roads, the funding.
Precisely. They focused on visible inputs, as he calls them, but often completely overlook the underlying organizational form, the structure itself.
Which led to disappointment.
Often, yes. Predictably disappointing outcomes. Because there was this mismatch.
Right.
He uses that powerful analogy.
The skyscraper one.
Yeah, it is like building a skyscraper on the foundation of an old hut. The structure simply cannot support the demands placed upon it.
That really paints a picture, pouring resources into something that just fundamentally can't hold them or use them effectively.
Exactly. Talent, money, tech, it all flows in.
Right.
But the system itself isn't built to handle that complexity, to turn it into lasting progress. It just collapses under the weight, or the intervention fizzles out.
Right.
And that's where the ULIC becomes so important, he argues. It helps you see past the surface problems to those deep structural limits.
The skyscraper on the hut. It really makes you wonder how many well-meaning efforts are kind of doomed from the start by that mismatch. So, okay, what's the big takeaway for us, for you listening? Why should you care about this structural thinking idea? It sounds maybe a bit academic.
Well, it sounds academic, but the core message is incredibly practical. Sustainable change begins with structure. Full stop.
Okay.
The ULIC helps explain why sheer talent isn't enough if the system's out of whack, why just pouring in money doesn't automatically create prosperity, Why amazing technology sometimes fails miserably.
Because it's not embedded properly.
Right. It needs to be embedded in a system that can actually hold, direct, and amplify their value. He argues that big breakthroughs throughout history in any field didn't just come from trying harder. They came from redesigning the system to handle more complexity, to channel energy better. It's about building better containers for our efforts.
So shifting from fixing individual problems to actually designing for, what did you call it? Systemic emergence? Creating the conditions for prosperity to grow.
That's the idea, and that's why, in his book, Dr. Israeli dives into things that seem unrelated at first glance, like trust or entropy.
Entropy, like disorder.
Yeah, exactly. That measure of disorder or randomness, or even the evolution of the universe. They aren't sidetracks. He sees them as essential lenses for testing if this universal law really holds up.
So checking if the pattern repeats everywhere.
Right. By looking at how systems evolve or don't across all these different areas, we can understand why some structures create lasting success and others just stagnate, even if you pump resources into them. He's trying to show it's a truly universal principle.
And this also explains why just copying successful models, like, say, a modern corporation or a kibbutz, might not work everywhere.
Definitely. Because often the founders of those successful models, they might have built something amazing, but they didn't necessarily understand the underlying structural reasons why it works so well.
So just imitating it is risky.
It can be very risky. As he says, we risk applying tools to systems that cannot support them, or setting expectations that the structure was never designed to fulfill.
Right. Copying the skyscraper design, but trying to build it on that hut foundation again.
Exactly. A model works great here, fails miserably there, and without understanding the structure, we're just left guessing or blaming people when the real issue is the design mismatch.
Okay, so how does the ULIC help us get past that guesswork?
Well, the ULIC, he argues, reveals why certain models succeed not by chance, but because their structure aligns with the demands of increasing complexity. It gives us a way to understand why things work.
And potentially predict how they'll behave.
Yes, and maybe even anticipate how systems will cope with pressure, with growth, with change. More importantly, it offers a design framework, a way to think about building new systems that are inherently more resilient, more adaptable, capable of sustained progress.
So not just copying old blueprints, but engineering new ones based on principles.
Exactly. Like how engineers don't just copy one bridge designed for every river. They understand the principles, the physics, the material science, and then they design a structure tailored to the specific challenge. The goal is finding those principles that hold across many situations.
And this all comes back to that fundamental question driving his work. How do we build systems that prosper not only for a moment, but for generations?
That's the core ambition. Enduring, sustainable impact.
Wow. Okay, so we started this deep dive talking about, fruit flies attacking mangoes, and we've ended up discussing universal laws that potentially govern everything from atoms to societies. It really is. And Dr. Israeli's core message seems to be this challenge. Look beyond the quick fixes, beyond even brilliant single technologies, and start focusing on consciously, intentionally designing the systems we operate within.
Yeah, the power of his universal law of increasing complexity as he presents it is that it gives us a potential framework, a way to spot weaknesses, maybe build more resilience, and actually design for growth, whether that's in a small community project, a big company, or even thinking about national economies.
It's an invitation to look deeper.
Exactly. Look past the surface problems, the things we usually blame, and examine that hidden architecture underneath. Because, according to this idea, sustainable change really does start with structure.
So thinking about that, maybe a final thought for you listening. Consider a system in your own life, maybe at work, in your community, wherever. Could it be operating on that old hut foundation when what it really needs now is something more like a skyscraper structure to handle the complexity, the purpose it has today? What might it look like to even start thinking about redesigning it? Thinking about increasing its complexity, its coherence, its shared purpose, using some of these ideas. How could this law apply to the challenges you see around you? Something to definitely mull over.